That night I was working my usual DoorDash shift. It's my full-time job, so I try to put in at least 8 or 9 hours a day. But honestly, I'm terrible at sticking to a schedule. Most nights, I'd procrastinate starting my shift, sometimes not even hitting the road until 9 or 10 p.m. This night was one of those nights. I'd already been working for about 3 hours, and it was around 1 a.m. when an order came through. It was a grocery pickup from a nearby gas station convenience store. I drove up to the empty lot and went inside. The place was quiet, with no one around except the cashier. Back in my car, I double-checked the order. Just a single large, cheap bottle of wine. Kind of an odd order, and a little inconvenient for me too. I usually prefer deliveries where I can just leave everything on the porch without interacting with anyone. But with alcohol, I had to make sure they could show their ID. That meant waiting until they answered the door. The house was just over 15 minutes away, tucked deep in the woods. Most of the town is heavily forested, so that wasn't unusual. But as I drove down the driveway, I noticed it was rough and overgrown, not well maintained at all. When I finally reached the house, it was completely isolated. A single, very old home with no visible lights on. My headlights were the only thing illuminating the front of the building. I parked and stepped out. The silence in the woods was total, like I was the only person, or even living thing around. Every sound I made seemed amplified in the stillness. It was 1 a.m. I stood next to my car, pulling up the order on my phone, making sure everything was ready for the ID check. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a light flickering in the woods. At first, I didn't think much of it. It looked like it could have been from someone else's house, maybe a porch light somewhere in the distance. But I couldn't actually see a house, just the faint glow. The light was a good distance away, barely visible as it leaked through the trees. Once I had everything ready on the app, I walked up onto the porch. There was no doorbell that I could see, so I knocked. The sound echoed through the house in a way that immediately stood out, hollow, like the place was empty. It was a little strange, but I brushed it off and waited. Up to that point, the only thing that felt mildly off was the fact that there were no lights on anywhere, not inside, not on the porch. The only illumination came from my car's headlights washing over the front of the house. Still, old homes tucked into the woods were pretty common around here, so it didn't immediately set off alarms for me. After about a minute, I heard movement behind the door. A second later, it creaked open. Right away, I noticed how dark it was inside. I expected at least some dim light deeper in the house, or for them to turn something on as they came to the door, but there was nothing. It was nearly pitch black. I could barely make out the man standing there. He was tall and thin, with most of his face swallowed by shadows. I told him I just needed to check his ID since the order included alcohol. He nodded, and I think he smiled slightly, though it was hard to tell. He said he needed a moment to grab his wallet. His voice was slow, rough, almost gravelly. He left the door open as he turned and walked down the hallway, disappearing into the darkness just a few feet from the entrance. That's when the unease really kicked in. I'd already felt a little unsettled, but realizing this guy was just living in total darkness didn't sit right at all. As my nerves started ramping up, I found myself scanning my surroundings. I glanced back at my car, sitting alone in the gravel driveway with its headlights still on, the dark forest stretching endlessly behind it. Then my attention shifted toward the trees beside the house. That's when I saw the light again. Only this time it was closer. I stared at it, and after a few seconds, I realized it was moving, not sweeping around, but gently swaying, like someone standing still and holding a flashlight pointed in my direction. A cold chill ran straight through me. It couldn't have been more than 50 feet into the woods. The area was still dead silent. I couldn't hear footsteps, voices, or anything at all. And then suddenly, I heard something from inside the house. I snapped my attention back to the open doorway, staring into the dark hallway. From inside I heard faint creaks, floorboards shifting slowly, deliberately, like someone was carefully making their way toward the entrance. That was enough. I jumped off the porch and sprinted for my car. As I ran, I caught movement from the light in the woods, but I didn't stop long enough to see what it was doing. I got in, started the engine, and took off, my heart pounding as I struggled to catch my breath. I drove until I felt steady enough, then pulled back into the same gas station where I'd picked up the order. It's strange how the brain works in moments like that, how hard it tries to convince you that what you experienced wasn't really what it felt like. I couldn't come up with a logical explanation, but I knew I was too shaken to keep working. I ended my shift and went home. For days afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Eventually, I decided to look into the place, not so much to uncover the truth, but to reassure myself that there was nothing to be afraid of. Instead, I found something far worse. The house had been abandoned for over 50 years. The surrounding land was listed as vacant too, completely empty, with no nearby homes at all. Or at least it was supposed to be. I don't know what was waiting for me out there that night, but I'm convinced that whatever it was, I barely escaped with my life. In 2019, I headed out to my older brother's cabin to watch his dog while he went on a short 3-day work trip. He didn't want to leave Cooper with anyone unfamiliar, so I volunteered. I call it a cabin, but it's really just a normal-sized house tucked away in the middle of the woods. The first day was mostly spent catching up with my brother until he left around 3 p.m. There isn't much to do at his place besides relax and maybe listen to music by the fireplace. After dinner, I decided it'd be nice to sit outside by a campfire and watch the sunset. I brought Cooper along, and for the first hour, it was actually pretty peaceful. But as soon as the sun dipped below the trees, the atmosphere changed. Darkness fell quickly, and the quiet of the woods became downright unsettling. Less than 10 minutes later, I put out the campfire and went back inside. Being out there at night just wasn't for me. It gave me a serious, creepy vibe. I settled on the couch with Cooper and, somewhat ironically, put on a horror movie. The long drive earlier had me exhausted, so I kept dozing in and out. At some point I woke up and noticed Cooper wasn't next to me. I sat up and looked around. He was sitting by the front door, not just lounging casually, but upright, stiff, staring directly at it. "Cooper, you okay, buddy?" I asked. He glanced at me for a brief second, then immediately turned his attention back to the door. Feeling uneasy, I walked over, patted him on the side and peered through the peephole. Nothing. I cracked the door open and looked out. It was still too dark to make anything out, but there were no animals or movements outside either. I closed the door and returned to Cooper, assuming maybe a deer or some other wildlife had passed by moments before. At this point, it's probably worth mentioning that Coop was a young German Shepherd mix, a very smart dog. I didn't doubt that he'd sensed something, but I assumed it had to be a harmless animal wandering near the cabin. I finished the movie and went to bed shortly afterward. The next morning, I took Coop outside, and we had a calm, quiet start to the day. I sipped coffee and just relaxed around the cabin. I thought about going for a walk, but I didn't want to venture too far into the forest and risk getting lost, so we stayed close to the house. As the sun began to set, I headed back inside to avoid the darkness and repeated pretty much the same routine as the night before. I sprawled on the couch and put on a movie. Coop stayed with me for a while before wandering off to explore the rest of the house. Then, out of nowhere, I heard his loud, deep bark coming from behind me. I jumped up and called his name, rushing into the kitchen. Coop was standing there, tail tucked, fur on his back raised, barking aggressively at seemingly nothing. I tried to calm him, but even when he stopped barking, he continued with a low, menacing growl. I had no idea what had spooked him. There was absolutely nothing in the kitchen. The only window above the counter was too high for him to even see out of. I spoke to him in a soft, soothing voice, trying to settle him down, and then led him back to the living room to sit on the couch with me. For a brief moment he seemed calmer, but then a hollow tapping sound came from the kitchen again. Coop immediately started barking once more. This time I didn't even try to stop him. My own nerves were on edge. I got up and walked back to the kitchen. Nothing. The tapping sounded like it was coming from the outside of the window, so I looked out. But there was nothing there. I couldn't figure it out. Maybe it was a raccoon or some other animal trying to get in. Or maybe I was just not used to the sounds of being alone in a cabin in the woods. But what unsettled me most was that Coop was clearly on high alert. If it were just normal noises, he wouldn't have been reacting like that. It was getting late, so I decided we should move to the bedroom to try and calm down. There was a small TV in there, so I continued the movie in bed, with Coop sitting right next to me, ears up, alert the entire time. By around 11 p.m., I turned off all the lights in the cabin and started getting ready for bed, hoping the night would pass quietly. I let Cooper stay in the bedroom with me that night. I shut the door, topped off his water bowl, and stepped into the shower to rinse off before bed. Despite the odd moments earlier, I was still enjoying myself and was looking forward to crawling into bed and waking up to enjoy my last day at the cabin. That feeling didn't last. While I was in the shower, a few heavy thumps suddenly hit the wall, followed immediately by Cooper erupting into loud barking. My stomach dropped. I shut the water off, threw my clothes on as fast as I could, and rushed back into the bedroom. Cooper wasn't there. The bedroom door, now wide open, made my heart sink. Coop was smart, but opening doors on his own felt impossible. Then I heard his barking echoing farther away through the cabin. I ran into the hallway and toward the front of the house, and that's when I saw it. The front door was open. Before I could even process what was happening, I saw Cooper bolting away from the cabin, straight into the woods, barking furiously. Within seconds, he vanished into the darkness. His barks grew faint, then more distant, until they nearly disappeared. I grabbed a flashlight from the front closet and ran after him without thinking. The moment I was deep in the trees, surrounded by nothing but darkness and towering trunks, his barking stopped completely. Realizing that made me freeze in place. The forest went eerily quiet, just a light breeze moving the branches overhead. "Cooper! Coop! Cooper!" I yelled his name over and over, hoping he'd abandon whatever he was chasing and come back to me. Those minutes felt endless. My fear kept building with every second of silence. Then I heard leaves rustling ahead. A second later, Cooper came running toward me. His tail was tucked tight, his body low, fear written all over him. He let out quiet whimpers and kept glancing back into the darkness behind him, like he was terrified of something still out there. I didn't hesitate. I made sure he stayed right with me as we ran back to the cabin and slammed the door behind us. Once inside, I called 911, then my brother, and waited for help to arrive. We didn't stay there that night. We packed up and went straight to a hotel, where we stayed until my brother returned the next day. There was never much closure afterward. It was clear someone had been watching the cabin, likely for days, and had somehow broken in, only to be chased off when Cooper confronted them in the bedroom. What happened out there in the woods while Cooper was alone, I'll never know. But he was shaken for weeks after that night. Thankfully, he eventually recovered. That was easily the most terrifying experience of my life. If Cooper hadn't chased whoever it was away, I honestly don't know if I'd still be here. Now, more than 6 years later, Coop is getting older, pushing 10 years old. I still love seeing him every time I visit my brother. Even though he's not my dog, I'll always be grateful for what he did that night, protecting me, and maybe even protecting my brother from whoever is still out there in those woods. I was finally heading home after a long, exhausting day at work. By the time I got on the road, it was already close to midnight. Normally, I take the train into the city since the drive is about an hour and a half, but I knew I'd be working late that night, later than the last train runs. I was drained, not just from the shift itself, but because I was already a couple hours past my usual bedtime. Once I got out of the city and onto the long, straight rural roads, the fatigue really started to hit. I wasn't worried about falling asleep at the wheel, but it felt like pure misery forcing myself to stay alert. The road stretched on endlessly, empty and quiet. After about 40 minutes, with only a handful of cars passing by, something on the side of the road caught my attention. A pickup truck was pulled over on the grassy shoulder. No headlights, no hazard lights, no sign of anyone nearby. It was strange, considering how remote the area was, but I brushed it off. Probably ran out of gas or broke down and got a ride home. I didn't think much of it. Until less than 2 minutes later, I passed another vehicle. This one was a car parked just off the road near the tree line. Same thing, no lights, no movement, no people. That definitely wasn't normal. I'd driven this route plenty of times before and had never seen anything like that. It snapped me out of my tired haze a bit, and I started scanning the sides of the road more carefully as I drove. A few minutes later, without any warning at all, something suddenly appeared directly in my headlights, right in the middle of the road. There wasn't even time to react. I felt a hard thump as my right tire ran straight over it. For a moment, I just froze, shocked by how abruptly it happened. I kept driving, listening closely, hoping whatever I hit hadn't done any damage. But less than a minute later, I could tell something was wrong. I didn't even need the tire pressure warning to come on. I could feel it. My tire was going flat. I pulled over to the side of the road, and as I sat there, it hit me how unsettling the situation was. Just like the other 2 vehicles I'd seen earlier, except this time, I was still here. I put the car in park and took a deep breath before stepping out. I was too exhausted to even be angry, just frustrated and defeated. Walking around to inspect the damage, I saw deep scrapes around the wheel well, and the tire was already halfway deflated. There was no fixing this on my own. I'd need a tow. Before getting back into the car, I glanced around at my surroundings. I was stranded on a long, empty stretch of road between towns, with nothing but trees in every direction. The isolation suddenly felt heavy, creeping, uncomfortable. And just as that uneasy feeling really started to settle in, I noticed something else. Far down the road, someone was walking toward me. I couldn't make out many details about him. Part of that was the darkness, but it was also because he was walking right along the edge of the trees, almost deliberately staying out of the road. It felt like he didn't want to be seen. At first, I assumed he might have belonged to one of the cars I'd passed earlier, but the closer he got, the worse the feeling in my stomach became. I climbed back into my car and started calling for a tow. While I was on the phone, the man drew nearer. Just before he reached me, he stepped out from the tree line and crossed through the grass, heading straight toward the road and toward my car. He stopped right next to my window. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, shifting slightly, his movements tense and erratic. There was something deeply unsettling about him, like he wasn't fully grounded or predictable. I couldn't tell what he wanted, and that scared me more than if he had said something. Then his eyes met mine. The look he gave me sent a jolt of fear through my body. Every instinct I had screamed that I needed to leave immediately. I didn't hesitate. I threw the car into drive and pulled away. I knew driving on a damaged tire could make things worse, but I didn't care. Whatever that guy was doing out there, it wasn't normal. About 20 seconds later, I passed another vehicle. This one was different. One of its doors was hanging open and the interior lights were still on. It looked like the place the man had come from. I didn't slow down. Once I reached the nearest town, I pulled over and got help for my car. At the time, I chalked the whole thing up to a bizarre and unsettling encounter. something strange, but ultimately harmless. After my tire was fixed, life went on, and the memories slowly faded. That was until 4 days later. I came across a news story about 2 people who had gone missing along the same rural stretch of road I used to get to and from work. My heart sank instantly. I thought back to that night, to the abandoned vehicles I'd seen, and started digging for more information. When I realized the disappearances happened on the exact same night, my blood ran cold. Those 2 abandoned cars belonged to the missing people. Both had suffered tire damage after hitting something left in the road, most likely placed there intentionally to force them to stop. I contacted the police and told them everything I remembered. As of now, neither of those people have been found. There are no suspects, no real leads, nothing. And I still can't stop thinking about how close I came to becoming the 3rd person who never made it home.